As you can see, I am myself a madwoman in an attic, so I guess it's only fitting that I'm here to talk about Jane Eyre. I wish I could hold up a copy of Jane Eyre, but I don't have one here. I swear I'm not lying when I say it's one of my favorite books. I moved abroad a couple years ago and I had to make some very hard decisions about which books were going to come with me, and I'm very surprised that I did not grab my copy of Jane Eyre, but apparently I didn't. So just imagine that I'm holding up the book right now. This, by the way, you were probably reasonably expecting is tea, but it is in fact chicken stock, because yesterday I roasted a chicken and then I spent 15 hours simmering chicken overnight, and this is really good. I don't think I could ever bring myself to make a ranked list of my favorite books of all time, because I don't want to pit them against each other. That feels mean, but I can imagine like a big group of books all collected together that are the ones that I have the deepest attachment to and the strongest feelings about, and I want them all just like clustered around, like when you make your dream dinner party guest list and everyone is just sitting around at the table for you to talk to. And if I made that big group of my favorite books, Jane Eyre would definitely be on the guest list. Jane Eyre, the book, at least. Maybe Jane Eyre, the character, although I feel like she would judge me if I refilled my glass of wine one too many times, which is how I ended up drinking chicken stock the morning after Thanksgiving in the first place. Jane Eyre is a book that I just feel so strongly about, and I think it's partly because I am really fascinated by the Bronte sisters and the family as a whole, the story of these people. I have never written an academic paper about a Bronte novel, and I don't think I would ever want to, because I cannot, or I don't want to, take that kind of scholarly distance that you need to write a paper about a text. I cannot distance myself from how fascinated I am by these women and how personally attached to their stories I feel. I can't actually remember the first time I read Jane Eyre, but I remember when I fell in love with the book and with the Brontes. It was the summer I was 19, the summer after my first year of undergrad, and I checked out this absolute brick of a book that was a biography of the Bronte family. It must have been close to 1,000 pages long, and I just carried it around the city with me all summer, just reading it and just totally absorbing myself in imagining life for the Brontes and reading their books and thinking about these women in connection with the texts that they wrote. The three Bronte sisters who published novels, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, lived these short, creative lives that must have been filled with all the normal human pettiness and joy and fun that would be true of anybody, but we don't know the details of those parts of their lives so much as we know the truly tragic details of their lives, of all of these women, and I think especially of Charlotte. The mother of the family passed away shortly after the youngest sibling was born, and when all the children were quite young, the four oldest sisters, Maria, Elizabeth, Charlotte, and Emily, were sent away to a school for girls, and a typhoid epidemic swept through the school, and the oldest two siblings, Maria and Elizabeth, were only about 10 years old, and they passed away. And so all of a sudden Charlotte was not only the oldest sibling, but the oldest woman in her family. The surviving siblings were Charlotte, the oldest, and then the one brother, Branwell, and then Emily and Anne. And while they were growing up, they wrote these stories together as a form of play. The four siblings created these imaginary worlds populated partly by historical figures and partly by original characters, and they would write like current events papers about what was happening in these worlds, and sometimes one of the siblings would kill off a character in one of the stories, and then the next one would retaliate by bringing the character back from the dead in the next installment. I've always really loved that detail, because when I was like 12 or so, I used to write stories together with my best friend, and we had this like fantasy world that we made together, and we each had two characters who were ours. And sometimes I would write a chapter where I'd be mad at my friend and I would make her characters cry a lot because I thought that was embarrassing, and then she would get back at me by making my characters pass out all the time. And it just feels like this little moment of time collapsing to think of these siblings almost 200 years ago doing the same kind of creative playful pettiness that me and my best friend used to do. Originally, all four of the siblings were writing about one world called Angria, but then the younger two, Emily and Anne, seceded from Angria, and they made a world called Gondal. And they kept writing as they grew up, and of course, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne ended up publishing novels. They all published their first novels in the same year under male pseudonyms. So instead of Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Bronte, they were Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Charlotte was the first sister to be published. Her debut novel was Jane Eyre, and it was this huge success. The novel was published in September of 1847, and by May of 1849, Charlotte had become an only child. First, Branwell died, and he was ill, but it was made worse by the fact that he had a crippling addiction to alcohol. And then Emily died of tuberculosis, and then Anne died of the same. So within an 8-month span, Charlotte had lost all 3 of her surviving siblings. And Charlotte would live only another 6 years before passing away at the age of 38, only less than a year after she got married due to complications during pregnancy. I'm just so fascinated by these women and so moved by the fact that they wrote these books that are some of my favorite. Wuthering Heights would also be on my dream dinner party book guest list, and I love Tenant of Wildfeld Hall as well. And they wrote these gorgeous, gorgeous novels, and their lives were so fascinating and so creative and so tragic and short, and it breaks my heart for them to think about it and to think about how much they could have thrived and how much more they could have written and lived if they had had more time. A couple years ago, I was able to go to Haworth, which is the town in the UK that they lived in, and I walked around the town. It's very well preserved in a lot of the old structures. I walked around the moors on the same path that they did. I saw the ruins of a house called Top Withens that is suggested to have maybe been part of the inspiration for Wuthering Heights, and it was probably the closest to like a spiritual pilgrimage that I will ever do. I just love them so much, and I love Jane Eyre, and I haven't even gotten to my list of reasons to love Jane Eyre yet. I just cannot restrain myself from giving you a detailed biography of these women. Not as detailed as it could be though. I held back a little bit. And I understand that this book is not going to be for everyone, but if you are kind of interested in reading it, or if maybe you have to read it for class, or maybe you read it and you hated it and you want to know what the hell people like about it in the first place, I just want to share some of the reasons that I love Jane Eyre. And in the first part of the video, I will give my reasons for loving Jane Eyre, absent any spoilers, before at the end of it, I will just get into all the details. Spoilers be damned. The first reason that I would give for loving Jane Eyre doesn't actually have to do with the book itself, but is just the fact that Jane Eyre is a classic, and that means different things to different people. To me, when a book is a classic, it does not mean that it is automatically good, morally or in terms of writing quality. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily more powerful or better written than another book, and it certainly doesn't mean that you will necessarily like it more than you would like a different book. But what it does mean to me for something to be a classic is simply that it has been read and studied by so many people across years and decades and centuries. I kind of visualize what a classic is to myself as like a long line that stretches across like the timeline of history, starting from the moment it was published and continuing on possibly forever. And this line just stands there across historical spans, and every time somebody reads the book, they touch that line, and there's just these points of people grabbing onto it. And so every time I pick up a classic now, I am touching that line, and I am connecting back to the thousands, if not millions of people who have read this same thing and have thought about it and discussed it and maybe loved it or maybe hated it. And so for me, one of the reasons to love Jane Eyre is that as a classic, when I am reading it, I'm like joining this group. I'm settling into this legacy of readers. Another reason to love Jane Eyre, the book, is because of Jane Eyre, the character. Even though I said I'm not sure that I would want her at my dream dinner party, she is a fascinating character, and she's so sharply drawn, and she's so vibrant. One of probably the most famous quotes from this book is something that Jane says in a very pivotal argument. She says, quote, "Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart." And this moment in the text and this line that Jane says is exactly what is to be loved about her character. She is extremely passionate and extremely sharp in terms of her sharp wit and also her sharp edges. She's delivering this line to somebody who has infinitely more power than her in absolutely every way that you can, and it's been poking and poking at her, and she stands up to him in this amazing impassioned speech. She does not allow people to walk over her from the moment we meet her in her childhood all the way up through the end of the book. And she has such a clear voice as well, because the novel is written in the first person from Jane's perspective, and she talks to us in a way that is very direct, very personal, and also very blunt. She does not pull any punches. She tells us basically from the onset, she is poor, she is not beautiful, she is not remarkable. This is the story of her life, and she is going to deliver the unvarnished truth. And I really feel that Jane is a very realistic character. She's very clearly drawn, and she is flawed as well. She has a real mean streak as a child, and she is very severe as an adult. Again, I'm not necessarily sure that I would be her friend or that she would want to be mine, but I feel that I know her when I read this book. Jane is orphaned at a very young age, and she is raised by her aunt, to whom she is not biologically related and who absolutely hates her. Has this very sad, lonely early childhood that is characterized by being ostracized from the people who are ostensibly her family, but who hold absolutely no family love for her. And then she is sent away to a school when she is quite young, and she continues to struggle. She does find herself at this school, and she matures and finds some more peace and some friendship in her life, and feels a lot of comfort when she becomes truly independent from the family that rejected her, and she is able to be standing on her own and comfortable with that. And it's very satisfying to read the life story of a woman who is not wealthy or beautiful or has any particular advantages for her, but to read this story of her going through life as this passionate person and falling in love. And of course, another reason to love this book is the love story in it. Jane Eyre is not exactly a romance novel. It's more a coming-of-age story. It's about Jane, but there is at the heart of it, and as the driving force of it, this great love story. When she's 18, Jane is teaching at the school where she once was a student, and she decides she is no longer happy there, and she wants something new and exciting. And so she looks for work as a governess, and she's hired to care for a little French orphaned girl who is being cared for by a wealthy man in a windy, isolated old estate, and that man is Edward Rochester. Jane and Rochester fall in love, which is a very trite way to describe what really happens, which is that they become, frankly, obsessed with each other. I have read hundreds, if not thousands, of love stories in my life. I read a lot of romance novels, and I have never read a love story quite like the one between Jane and Rochester. And I think that's partly because there is, in this obsession and this love that they have for each other, there is a lot of tenderness, but there's also something very brutal about it. The love that they have for each other is one of deeply knowing the other person and deeply valuing and caring for the other person, but also this identification with the one that they love past the point of being able to see themselves anymore. They lose themselves in each other, and this is part of the obstacle to them being together, is that they have to move past that. But there is a point at which they are just completely lost in each other in a way that is almost brutal sometimes, and I like it. And if Jane is blunt with us as readers, she is even more harsh and uncompromising with Mr. Rochester. But it's all of these things that make her such a compelling character, her bluntness, her severity, her strong will, all of her jagged edges, that are what he loves about her. But even though they have all this love for each other and this love story is so compelling, the obstacles to them being together are even more substantial and compelling, which makes this just a real journey to go on as a reader. And that's another thing that I love about this novel, is that it is very challenging. And not just in the sense that it is challenging to get through, although some people definitely feel that way, but I mean that when I read this book, it challenges my ideas and my perspective. There are characters and plot points and details that I find frustrating or even upsetting, including sometimes the ending. I'm not altogether sure that I like it all the time. And then that experience of being frustrated, of being challenged, means that I have to kind of think about the text more critically. I have to consider why I am having these reactions, why I feel this way, why I love this book that I sometimes want to physically throw across the room. Not that I actually can right now because I don't own a copy of the book, but like the audiobook, I could just chuck my phone across the room. Why are you making these decisions, Jane? And these reactions and feelings that I have change over time. Every time I read it, I feel a little bit differently and I notice new things. Right now, for example, I'm rereading it for the first time in at least a couple years, and I am really struck for the first time by the fact that Jane is 18 when she meets Rochester. She's a teenager when they're falling in love. And I was probably around 18 the first time I read it, and that wouldn't have struck me. But now I'm 29 and I'm seeing that much differently. And my feelings about that now are an opportunity for me to be thinking through the power dynamics in this relationship, to become curious about marriage conventions in the mid-1800s, and to really question in myself, how much am I able to understand and love Mr. Rochester, which sometimes I do, versus how much am I going to be judging him when I think about his actions in a realistic context. But I cannot get into that without getting into spoilers, so let's move on to things I love about this book that contain spoilers. If you've made it this far in the video, I hope you'll leave a comment saying what one of your favorite works of classic literature is, and I would love to make some more videos talking about my feelings about classics. I'm relatively new to YouTube, and I'm really looking forward to making these longer form videos digging into literature and writing, and I'm really looking forward to have some substantial conversations with people on here. For me, Mr. Rochester is one of the things to love about this book. And I say that not necessarily because I love him, although I kind of do, but because he is one of these things that challenges me in this book and really gives me something to like mentally grapple with. I really want to just outright hate this man. Sometimes I do, and if I met him in real life, I definitely would. He is so much older than Jane, and he fucks with her head all the time. He plays these little mind games with her that just feel so unnecessary. And he tries to trap her in a bigamous marriage and then is shocked when she wants to leave him. Even with all that, there is something so magnetic about this character. And again, maybe it's just that he's so sharply drawn and he feels so realistic and his flaws are so understandable. And despite all these flaws, he remains so compelling. And part of that might be because he is just so clearly and believably in love with Jane. He doesn't always treat her well, and his actions are demanding of criticism, but he sees her for exactly who she is, and he just adores her. The moment that he proposes to her and declares his love for her follows immediately after the moment I quoted earlier of Jane just standing up for herself and telling somebody off who has every bit of power over her that a person could possibly have. He is messing with her, he's teasing her in this moment, telling her that he's going to marry another woman and he's going to send Jane off to Ireland to be a governess for a family over there. And she just reaches her breaking point and she yells at him for not seeing her as a full person, for treating her as less than him, which in the eyes of most people in England at this time, she is in a lesser position than him. She is a poor woman with no family who is his employee, and she just will not take the disrespect that he is giving her. She yells at him so much, and he follows that by this long passage of some really beautiful declarations of love. It is her prickliness and her harshness and her ability to stand up for herself that is what he loves about her. She literally tells him all the time that he's ugly, and he's just like, I love it. I love you, Jane. Part of the reason that I probably still love this character despite all of my better instincts is that there is like real sexual tension between Jane and Rochester. I have never stopped thinking about the scene where she has awoken in the middle of the night and realizes that his bed is on fire and he is passed out from the smoke in his bed, and she saves him by dousing his bed in buckets of water. And then they are standing alone in his bedroom in the middle of the night. He is soaking wet, she's in her nightgown, he is holding her hands and saying, Jane, you cannot possibly be thinking that you're gonna leave me right now. And she's like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm going to leave you. The tension in that scene is impeccable, untouched in intensity from any contemporary spicy romance novel I have ever read. And it's fun to read. But of course there is one thing that I still have not mentioned, and the biggest reason to hate Mr. Rochester, which is also one of the biggest reasons that I love this book, and that is the character Bertha Mason, the mad woman in the attic. Bertha haunts the book for a long time through the presence of these mysterious laughs and unattributed acts of chaos that are happening within the house. But we don't actually find out about her until, I believe, chapter 27. Mr. Rochester gets all the way up to the altar with Jane before somebody else reveals that he is in fact already married, that he has been married for the past 15 years. And we learn that for the past 10 of those years, he has kept his wife, who has fallen insane, locked up in a room in the attic of his house. And every time I return to this book, I am more fascinated by Bertha than ever, and I feel more deeply about her and for her than the last time I've read it. She is not given the space to be as fully drawn a character as Jane or Rochester, but despite that, despite the fact that she never speaks in the entire book, she is so present and so strong and so fascinating, and she is the center of the book. Before we ever meet Bertha, we know that she's there because of the actions that she takes that Mr. Rochester gaslights Jane into thinking are the actions of a drunk servant, Grace Poole. And those actions are supposedly proof of Bertha's insanity, but they are very rational actions. She lights on fire the bed of her husband, who has locked her up in an attic for 10 years while he has affairs with other women and tries to marry the governess. She attacks her brother, who visits her after who knows how long and makes no attempt to help her, or even seems to make no recognition of the fact that she is in need of help in this situation. And she sneaks into Jane's bedroom while she's sleeping and tears up Jane's wedding veil on 2 nights before her wedding. These actions do not seem insane or senseless to me. They are, first of all, very poignant from a narrative perspective, but if we think about Bertha as a person, these are the actions of a desperate person who is trying to assert herself and to seek some kind of justice, and maybe even to warn Jane. And Bertha becomes an even more fascinating character in terms of who she is as an individual, and also the significance that the presence of this character has in the novel when we learn more of her backstory and we find out that she is from Jamaica, which is where Rochester met and married her, and that Bertha's mother was a Creole woman, which is an ambiguous term in the period. It could mean that Bertha is not white, that she is a mixed race woman. It could also mean that she is white and that Creole is being used not to delineate her race, but more her culture and where she's from. But even if we do take Bertha to be a white woman from Jamaica, she is described in racialized and in racist terms throughout the novel as broad, as bestial, as having a purple face and wild hair. Her insanity is described in terms of how it makes her incapable of speech, how it makes her crawl around on the floor. And these characteristics are part of what Rochester cites as the reason that Bertha is incapable and undeserving of love. Bertha is an outsider to 19th century English high society who has married a man who she did not know, who was only really interested in her for her beauty and her money, and who very quickly grows to hate her when he gets to know her. And he tells Jane that he doesn't hate Bertha because of her insanity, but that he does hate her. And this is something that Jane, in fact, calls him out on and is concerned about when she finds out about Bertha's existence, and they are talking through it in excruciating detail. And Jane says how unsettling it is to see how much hatred this man has for his wife, and that she is afraid that if she happened to fall ill or insane, that he would grow to hate her as well. And even though Rochester says that that isn't the case, he doesn't really give a compelling argument against the idea that he simply hates Bertha for her excesses and her insanity. And so Bertha is married to a man who despises her, and who, when she becomes incapacitated by her mental illness, takes her out of Jamaica, brings her to England, locks her up in an attic for 10 years, and tries to marry the governess. And these supposed acts of insanity that she commits just make so much sense to me when I actually think through her life and her situation. I would burn the house down too. I could make just an entire video rambling about all of my feelings about this character, all of the things that I think through when I confront her presence in this book, all of the potential symbolism that she has within the novel, all of the scholarship that has been devoted to this character who never actually speaks a word on the page. I think about Bertha's life and her actions. I think about the fact that she's literally sleeping above Jane's bed the entire time that Jane and Rochester are falling in love. I think about the fact that Charlotte Bronte probably didn't intend for me to love Bertha Mason as much as I do, and that Charlotte Bronte probably could have never imagined a book like Wide Sargasso Sea being written about this character. And this really just brings me full circle all the way back to my first reason for loving this book, which is, again, that it is a classic. And for something to be a classic, for it to have been read so often by so many people with so many perspectives across history, means that the text itself takes on new meanings and new importance and new grounds for criticism every time somebody has a reaction to this text, even if it's a negative reaction, maybe especially if it's a negative reaction. The text of Jane Eyre remains the same, but it remains this kind of magnet that pulls all these clusterings of ideas and scholarship and new perspectives, new pieces of literature inspired by this, new schools of thought about how to approach a book like this. For Jane Eyre to be a classic means that as much as I am fond of and fascinated by the Bronte family, Jane Eyre does not belong to Charlotte Bronte. It belongs to us, all of us who read it and interact with it and change it and are changed by it. And if you have read Jane Eyre, I hope that you will share in the comments any reasons that you have found to love this book, or to hate it, or to have any kind of feeling or reaction to it, because the real reason to love Jane Eyre is that then you get to talk to people about it. And thank you for listening to the ramblings of a mad woman in an attic.